Part 21. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 201. What are you two talking about? If you don't mind, you might as well come and listen to me. The king of Guzhu had a smile on his face, as if he was harmless to humans and animals. But Lin Yu was the only one who knew very well that this guy's purpose was probably not pure, and so were his motives. Lin Yu just shook his head, but there was a bit of complexity in his eyes, a special color flashed in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows, and there was also a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. I didn't say anything, I just chatted about some boring things. I believe Lord Guzhu Wang will not be interested. King Guzhu frowned slightly, but he didn't say anything more, he just coughed lightly. Ahem, you'd better understand some things clearly and don't do anything that goes too far, because once you do these things, they won't be of any benefit to you. The threat in Guzhu Wangji's words was very obvious. But Lin Yu didn't care about all this. He just waved his hand lightly, with a bit of amusement flashing in his eyes, and a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. It doesn't matter. But I still want to thank Lord Guzhu Wang for the reminder. At this moment, Lin Yu could sense that someone seemed to be spying on him. Even Lin Yu could detect it, let alone King Guzhu. At this time, the king of Guzhu had a sneer on his lips, and there was a kind of contempt and disdain in his eyes. You actually dare to spy on me? You are really overestimating your own abilities. It's ridiculous to say the least. After King Guzhu finished speaking, he just waved his hand, and then several of the one-eyed monsters were knocked to the ground. The death of those monsters was so tragic that one couldn't help but feel some sympathy. At this time, after seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with some complexity, and then he couldn't help but shake his head. It's boring, it's so boring. I really don't know what these big countries are doing when they come together to do this, but it's obvious that they don't have any good intentions. As an aborigine, the king of Guzhu only had a slight sneer on his lips after hearing what Lin Yu said, and a bit of contempt flashed in his eyes. What are the abilities of some guys who only dare to hide behind this and cower? It's simply ridiculous. At this time, the king of Guzhu glanced at Lin Yu after he finished speaking. You are like trapped animals in the cage, fighting each other until the end is just for people's entertainment. Don't be angry, I'm always right. King Guzhu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. At this time, after hearing what King Guzhu said, Lin Yu suddenly laughed. There was quite a look in his eyes. A bit contemptuous. Lord King Guzhu, it's better to worry less. Some things have nothing to do with you, right? Lin Yu's eyes were burning, and his eyes were like torches. At this time, when the king of Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intention on his body was vaguely revealed. Asshole, damn it! Do you know that those guys who dared to talk to me like this in the past have basically gone to hell now? Don't you want this too, little guy? King Guzhu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and Lin Yu's eyes were also fixed on King Guzhu. The two of them looked at each other, and there was a burst of intense sparks in their eyes. After a moment, Lin Yu just waved his hands gently like this, it's so boring. The male snake man came to King Guzhu and whispered a few words softly into his ear. At this time, King Guzhu's face darkened slightly, and a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. Are you telling the truth? How could those guys move so fast? Is it possible that there are others helping them? When King Guzhu said this, his face suddenly sank, and a special color flashed in his eyes. Then, as if he suddenly remembered something, his face suddenly changed. It just became gloomy. Asshole, if he really dares to cheat like this, I will never let this bastard off lightly. No one understood why King Guzhu was so angry. At this time, everyone was staring at King Guzhu with a bit of confusion in their eyes. The king of Guzhu just waved his hand gently, and then gave a wry smile, a helpless act, an unintentional mistake, a mistake caused by nothing, a helpless disaster. The king of Guzhu just spoke softly and unhurriedly. But at this time, after he finished speaking, he took an extremely mysterious step. His steps were elusive to everyone, and they didn't know what was going on. Everyone's eyes stared straight at him at the same time. He was staring at King Guzhu. After a moment, the Guzhu king stood firm, but when he appeared again, he had already appeared behind these 7-star lanterns. The 7 star lamps were originally off, but when he walked over, they actually lit up at the same time. Lin Yu stared straight at King Guzhu, with a bit of confusion flashing in his eyes. At this time, the king of Guzhu suddenly laughed. He turned his head and looked at Lin Yu, with a bit of teasing in his eyes. "Little guy, you can't study the secrets of this." Zhang Zia, the ancestor of the warrior clan, worked very hard to study this technique. So don't you think about it, how can you crack this mysterious technique with your strength? The king of Guzhu said slowly. Lin Yu just waved his hand lightly. "It's very interesting, but all this seems unimportant. Don't talk nonsense, don't listen nonsense, don't look at the surface of everything, right?" The king of Guzhu's face suddenly sank. He never thought that this little guy would dare to talk to him like this, but after a moment, he suddenly laughed. "Ha ha ha, you are really interesting, little guy. I am becoming more and more interested in you. However, these are not important. The 3 mountains and 5 peaks, the 4 seas and rivers, this huge world, all living beings cannot escape the word fate. Remember, everything is fate." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 202. At this time, all the people who were watching the live broadcast had an unbelievable look in their eyes after seeing this scene. You know, although Lin Yu has experienced a lot in these days, there are not many scenes that appear in front of the audience. This is one of the few shots he has had in the past few months, but it was interrupted by a man wearing ancient tribal costumes. Everyone looked at each other. You look at me, I look at you, their eyes are full of confusion and puzzlement. At this moment, they can't understand why Lin Yu is like this, and who the person around him is. Interesting, I didn't expect that there would be such a big discovery this time. There are actually indigenous people in this place. It seems that this matter is becoming more and more interesting. A man dressed in medieval noble costume suddenly sat up slowly from a chair, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and a hint of meaningful teasing flashed in his eyes. After a while, another man in the same clothes came in directly. The man came straight to Wells. "Sir, your guests are here. They are from Dragon Country. They seem to want to complete a deal with you. I wonder if we will meet today or not." The man stared at Wells. After hesitating for a moment, Wells suddenly stood up. At this time, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then he slowly turned his head and looked at the man. "Meet, of course. There is an old saying in Dragon Country that it is a pleasure to have friends from afar. Since our friends have come from afar, why should we not meet them?" After Wells finished speaking, he slowly stood up and walked outside. In the ancient tomb, several men wearing purple suits walked together. These men had blue hair and blue eyes. At a glance, they should be known as guys from M country. Our progress is too slow. And looking at the traces at the scene, someone should have arrived here faster than us. These guys got there first. If this continues, I'm afraid. A thin man wearing glasses gently pushed his glasses and spoke slowly. His tone was very calm, but everyone could feel the anxiety in his words. "I know, but you have seen the current situation. It can only be like this. Who knows if there is any other way to overtake now? This matter may be a little difficult. Explorers from other countries should have entered here. If this continues, I'm afraid." A middle-aged strong man suddenly stood up and analyzed in a deep voice. Everyone heard it. After the middle-aged strong man said this, his face was quite solemn. At this time, they looked at each other, not knowing how to answer. After a while, a person seemed to suddenly remember something. I remember that Dragon Country should have an official participating team. In addition to that official participating team, there is also a very special guy. You are talking about him. That guy has indeed become famous recently, but in my opinion, he is just a jumping clown and is not worth mentioning at all. Now that guy is not important, other people are important. Who are the others? Those guys who want to compete with us. At this time, Lin Yu and King Guzhu continued to walk forward for a while, but after this moment, King Guzhu's face suddenly became ugly. There was a flash of disbelief in his eyes, and then his brows were furrowed. It was that guy. His descendants did not die out at the beginning. As expected of the descendants of that family, they really have some skills and can hide the secrets. It seems that they still kept a hand at the beginning. King Guzhu murmured in a low voice. After hearing what King Guzhu said, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with confusion. At this time, of course, he understood that what he needed to do was to complete the task of the system. At this time, Lin Yu's mind moved, and he entered the system. Arya, tell me, where is the bead that needs to be found for this mission now? Lin Yu said softly. Arya heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, her eyes seemed to be quite complicated. Master, the magnetic field here is extremely complicated, and I can't find out where the bead is at all. 3 black lines appeared on Lin Yu's forehead. At this time, when Lin Yu saw the dazzling array of items, his heart was naturally very active, so at this time, the complex colors in his eyes began to become more and more obvious. And just after this moment, Lin Yu sighed leisurely, alas, there is nothing I can do, there is nothing I can do, now the situation is complicated, it seems that I can only take one step at a time, and observe one step at a time. When Lin Yu thought of this, he seemed to remember something, and after this moment, he retreated from the system again. King Guzhu saw that Lin Yu was absent-minded for a moment, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Interesting, you are really very interesting. After Lin Yu heard what King Guzhu said, he narrowed his eyes into a slit, turned his head to King Guzhu, and just glanced at him. I don't understand what the prince said. Where did you get this from? I think you should understand what I mean. I think you should also know what I said, right? Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, and then nodded slightly, maybe it's right. After waiting for a while, the group passed through a narrow corridor, and then came to a stone door. There were dragon and phoenix totems carved in front of the stone door. The dragon and phoenix totems seemed to be alive, lifelike, and awe-inspiring. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu was naturally filled with emotion. His eyes were fixed on the stone door with a complicated look in his eyes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 203. The king of Guzhu took a step forward, looked at the stone gate carefully, and then his eyes narrowed to a slit, and he couldn't help but shake his head slightly. Strange, this stone door is really strange. As I wandered through it, I remembered that my brother probably didn't see it at the time. This kind of stone door is the right one, but now there is the stone door. It really bothers me a bit, I don't understand it. King Guzhu gently unfolded his folding fan and waved it like this. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with confusion. Is it possible that you didn't even know this at the beginning? I have no relatives in the Tian family. Even my brother would not be able to tell me about this matter. After all, no one can believe what happened after his death. The king of Guzhu seemed to have seen through the heat and coldness of the world. His tone was neither urgent nor slow, neither fast nor slow. His words were somewhat relaxed, but anyone could see that in fact, the king of Guzhu was not in this way. And just a moment later, when Lin Yu heard the words of King Guzhu, a wry smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. No relatives in the Tian family, such a person has no relatives in the Tian family, what he said is true. At this time, the king of Guzhu turned around and glanced at Lin Yu. Yes, I have already experienced the harshness of the world, and I have also experienced intrigues, so sometimes I just hate why. Born into this royal family. But this is not important. If you want to open this door, have you seen the two yin and yang mirrors? There are a total of 3,762 changes in the yin and yang mirrors. We only have one chance. If my brother's method fails once, he will die. After Lin Yu heard King Guzhu say this, something complicated seemed to flash through his eyes, and then his eyes narrowed to a slit, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Meaning, if the royal family wants to protect themselves, I'm afraid they still have some means. Although this matter is a bit tricky, I believe Lord Guzhu King can see it clearly. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the king of Guzhu. At this moment, the king of Guzhu seemed to have suddenly realized something. His eyes turned towards Lin Yu. You glanced here. The two people looked at each other, and a faint smile suddenly appeared on the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and there was a bit of teasing in his eyes. After a moment, he suddenly smiled and shook his head. Interesting, it's really interesting. King Guzhu, there are some things I don't know whether to talk about or not. King Guzhu's brows were furrowed, and his eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, with a bit of coldness between his brows. Stop playing tricks with me here. If you dare to act like this again, believe it or not, I will kill you right now. King Guzhu's voice was a bit cold, and the look he looked at Lin Yu contained a bit more murderous intent. Lin Yu just shook his head and smiled, and then spread his hands helplessly. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something. He turned sideways, and then took a quick step to a place. At this time, he saw a stone pillar surrounding it. There are several special patterns carved on it. At this moment, Lin Yu's face was filled with joy, and there was quite a bit of excitement in his eyes. There was a sense of excitement in the corners of his eyes and brows, and the smile at the corners of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this moment, Lin Yu pointed to the stone pillar gently. Ordinary people would have no idea what these words on it meant. Even Lin Yu's eyes were filled with confusion. A few moments of doubt and confusion flashed through him, and he looked at it for a long time, but couldn't react. At this time, King Guzhu slowly walked forward for a few steps. Here he stared at these stone pillars, wrote a few words, and then gently spread out his words. Turn on the folding fan. At this time, the smile on the corner of Guzhu King's mouth began to become more and more obvious, and then he shook his head. You are indeed my brother. He is indeed amazing. I admire him very much. After Lin Yu heard what Guzhu King said, his face was full of confusion. He had no idea why Guzhu King said this at this moment. But since the king of Guzhu has said this, it is obvious that the king of Guzhu already knows something at this time, so he behaves like this. King Guzhu walked away. This stone pillar, he slowly came to the other stone pillar. He looked at it carefully for a while, and then walked towards the bare wall behind the stone pillar. Immediately afterwards, King Guzhu gathered a spiritual power in his palm, and he suddenly pushed towards the wall hard. Something that no one expected happened suddenly. There was a picture on the stone wall that no one could understand. The smile at the corner of Guzhu King's mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, he nodded with satisfaction, and the corners of his eyes and eyebrows were full of joy. That's right, that's right, that's true. Little guy, I've found out the key to opening the door. You're so smart. Tell me the secret of this picture today. Lin Yu certainly understood that the king of Guzhu was deliberately testing him, but he was not afraid at all. He took a step forward and then looked at the picture. At a glance, he understood that the picture seemed to be a king with his subjects offering sacrifices to a person with a human head and a snake body. But it was just a picture out of thin air, and he didn't know the cause and effect at all. Lin Yu looked at it for a long time and didn't see any clues. At this time, his eyebrows were suddenly locked together, and a few special colors flashed in his eyes, and then he shook his head. Strange, it's really strange. What's going on? There shouldn't be only this mural here. The king of Guzhu nodded gently. There are many murals here, but only this one can really unlock the secrets here, so don't think about those complicated ones, it's useless at all, the way is simple. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Chang. Chapter 204. After Lin Yu heard what Guzhu King said, he turned his head and glanced in his direction, and something complicated seemed to flash in his eyes. It doesn't sound like you don't understand. There's a mystery behind it, but why did you? Lin Yu paused when he said this. He turned his head and stared straight at the king of Guzhu, with a somewhat complicated look in his eyes. At this time, the king of Guzhu turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. I know my brother's temper very well, but I don't know much about the secrets, so you don't have to look at me like that. I have never lied to you. It's up to you to believe it or not. King Guzhu's tone was neither urgent nor slow, neither fast nor slow. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what King Guzhu said, he just nodded slightly and smiled. At this time, he also looked thoughtful. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Guzhu King said, his eyes were quite complicated. His eyes were staring at Guzhu King. For some reason, he always felt that the king of Guzhu in front of him was somewhat abnormal. King Guzhu also had a smile on his face. He looked at Lin Yu again, their eyes met, and there was a burst of intense sparks in their eyes. Although the two people had similar faces, their hearts were not. The male snake and the tomb keeper were facing the two of them. At this time, the male snake turned his head and glanced at the tomb keeper. What should we do now? Tell us. What else can we do? When gods fight, little devils suffer, but that's all. At this time, the tomb guard was talking unhurriedly, with a bit of helplessness in his eyes. There was also a wry smile on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were a bit more desolate. But at this moment, the snake man seemed to suddenly remember something, his eyes were a little complicated, and then there was a hint of a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. The gravekeeper turned his head and glanced in the direction of the male snake man. He seemed to have noticed something was wrong, so he just stared at the male snake man. What exactly do you want to do? I'm warning you, don't mess with the master's methods. I think you should know very well. If you dare to mess with it, I will suffer with you when the time comes. The snake man just waved his hand casually. I think you should also know my thoughts. When the snipe and the clam fight, the fisherman will benefit. You don't need me to teach you. The eyes of the snake man are as burning as torches. At this time, after hearing what the male snake man said, the tomb keeper's eyes evoked some complex colors, and then he seemed to understand something, and he nodded gently. Nod. I understand, you are still smart, but there are a lot of people coming this time. If such things fall into the hands of others in the end, we will really shoot ourselves in the foot. After the snake man heard what the tomb keeper said, she was also slightly startled, and then her eyes narrowed to a slit. After thinking for a moment, the corner of her mouth also curled up with a hint of vagueness. Smile. No, as long as we stop those guys. As long as we stop those guys, they won't be able to cause any trouble at all. The snake man just said this unhurriedly. At this time, the gravekeeper had a thoughtful look on his face. He was indeed a little puzzled by the snake man. The woman in front of him was indeed a little confused. The snake man just smiled. You don't have to look at me like this. Wealth can only be gained through danger. I think you should also understand this. If we want wealth, we must make a big bet. The male snake man's eyes were burning, and his eyes were quite firm. At this time, a bit of helplessness also flashed in the eyes of the tomb keeper, and then he nodded lightly. I'll listen to you, but I hope nothing happens. If something does happen, we will be the ones who suffer in the end. At this time, the tomb keeper nodded slightly, his eyes evoked some complex colors, and then a bit of cold light flashed in the depths of his eyes, and he looked towards King Gus, whose eyes were a little colder. And at this time, somewhere in the ancient tomb. Wang Yu, how are you? Are you okay? A man wearing a red jacket came to the girl's side. The man's eyes were staring directly at the girl, and there was quite a bit of concern in his eyes. Guhan, I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me. Our schedule can't be delayed, so let's keep moving forward now. The girl's eyes were staring straight at the man. After the man heard what the girl said, a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of helplessness. But now, I'm afraid there are some problems. After the girl heard what the man said, her eyes were somewhat complicated. She stared straight at the man, and there seemed to be some resistance in the depths of her eyes. Guhan just squatted down. Come up here and I'll carry you. After hearing what Guhan said, Wang Yu shook his head subconsciously. No, don't worry, I can do it. At this time, Wang Yu subconsciously looked at Chen Bing, and there was a little more pleading in his eyes. Chen Bing looked cold, turned his head and looked at Wang Yu, and then walked over slowly. She walked to Chen Bing's side, and a few special colors flashed in her eyes. Let me help you. Remember to be careful in the future. This ancient tomb is extremely dangerous and full of dangers. If you are not careful, it is easy to die. Chen Bing said slowly. At this time, Wang Yu also nodded gently, and there seemed to be a bit of complexity in his eyes. There was a bitter smile at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of helplessness. When Guhan saw Chen Bing and helped Wang Yu up, there was a shadow in his eyes, but after a moment, he returned to his normal appearance. After waiting for a while, Bai Mu walked to Guhan. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 205. Bai Mu patted Guhan's shoulder gently, with a bit of complexity in his eyes. It doesn't matter. She resists now, but she may not resist in the future. I know you like her, but don't ruin our big thing for a woman. Bai Mu said softly at this time. After hearing what Bai Mu said, Guhan hesitated for a moment, then nodded unwillingly, with a bit of helplessness in his eyes, and a bitter smile on his lips. I know that nothing is more important than our affairs. You should put this matter in your heart. What is important and what is not important, I still know this matter clearly. After hearing what Guhan said, Bai Mu nodded slightly, with a bit of complexity in his eyes and a bit of helplessness between his eyebrows. Obviously he didn't believe what Guhan said. After a moment, he shook his head and sighed faintly. Alas, I can't tell you in detail about many things. As long as you can distinguish them clearly, I don't need to say more about what is important. At this time, Bai Mu's eyes were burning, and his eyes were like torches. Guhan also nodded slightly, with a few special colors flashing in his eyes, and then a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. But at this moment, several men wearing black eagle costumes suddenly appeared in front of the four of them. There were also 4 people on the opposite side, and 4 people formed a small team, but the level of the beasts tamed by the opposite side was much higher than theirs. And just after this moment, the men came in front of Chen Bing and Wang Yu, and a man with a scorpion tattoo on his arm suddenly smiled faintly. Little beauty, are you injured? Why are you so careless? Your brother will feel distressed if you are injured. The eyes of the men were staring straight at Wang Yu, and their eyes were even more dishonestly looking back and forth at Chen Bing's body. After Chen Bing saw these men, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body was revealed. I advise you to get out of here quickly before I get angry, otherwise, it will be too late for you to get out later. Chen Bing's eyes were fixed on the men in front of him. For some reason, after hearing what Chen Bing said, these men suddenly felt a little scared, but a moment later, a man stepped forward and came to Chen Bing, staring at Chen Bing. "Asshole, how can you talk like that? If you want to die, I can help you, but no one dares to talk to me like this. I think you really want to die." Chen Bing clenched his fists, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body was revealed, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Interesting, it's really interesting. I didn't expect you to dare to talk to me like this. This Chen Bing is really domineering." As soon as he opened his mouth, he shocked the men in front of him. At this moment, they looked at each other, and a few special colors flashed in their eyes. A man with a poisonous snake tattoo on his face slowly walked in front of Chen Bing, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Little beauty is really interesting. You dare to talk to me like this? Could it be that you are so brave?" The man gritted his teeth and spoke word by word. Chen Bing's eyes flashed a few cold lights, and the murderous intent on his body quietly emerged. "I advise you to take your claws away, otherwise I will chop them off in a while." These people probably never thought that the woman in front of them would be like this, so at this moment, their eyes were staring straight at Chen Bing, especially the venomous snake at this moment, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and the excitement in his eyes was simply to a degree that was difficult to conceal. "Interesting, it is really interesting. If you want to chop off my claws, then the little beauty must have the ability to do it." After the venomous snake finished speaking, he suddenly had a thought, and then a nearly 5-meter long snake suddenly appeared behind him. This nearly 5-meter long snake spit out the snake core, and its eyes were fixed on Chen Bing. "It's a red rock snake. How could a red rock snake be in this guy's hands? How is this possible? Exotic beast, red flame snake lord level 6, level 49. Qualification, alien, intermediate. Life, 9999999. Speed, 9999999. Defense, 9999999. Attack, 9999999. Skills, red flame devouring the sky, burning nothingness, red refining. Red flame devouring the sky. The red flame snake activates a skill and spews out a flame. The temperature of the flame is extremely high and can burn this ordinary armor. It is extremely powerful and powerful. Burn nothingness. The red flame snake activates a skill, with the mysterious fire surrounding its body, which can cut off all things in the world, destroy all things in the sky, burn nothingness, and return to a peaceful time. Red refining. The red flame snake activates its skills to destroy an area of heaven and earth. It can bring all the laws of all things into one place, with red as the column and blood as the dye. Wherever the blood is dyed, all living things will be scattered and no grass will grow. A rare dignity flashed through Chen Bing's eyes. At this moment, his eyes were staring straight at the murderous body of the man in front of him, and his intentions were vaguely revealed in the corner of his mouth. A cold smile appeared on his side, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "Asshole, it's just a red snake. I really don't know what to do in front of me. If you know what I'm doing, get out of here. Otherwise, if I get angry later, it will definitely not do you any good." Chen Bing's eyes just stared at the man in front of him, with a bit of coldness flashing in his eyes, and the murderous intention on his body was even more looming. At this time, a sneer appeared on the corner of the man's mouth. "Oh, she's quite a bit fierce. I didn't expect this woman from the Dragon Kingdom to be so tasteful and interesting. She's really quite interesting." The man's eyes were staring at Chen Bing. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 206. Just as Chen Bing was about to take action, a man slowly walked over. Who else could this man be if he wasn't Bai Mu? A faint smile appeared at the corner of Bai Mu's mouth, and a hint of contempt flashed in his eyes. How dare cats and dogs come out now? It's really ridiculous. Who do you think you are? You actually dare to go out and act wild. Although Bai Mu looks like a frail scholar, I am afraid that only a few members of the Dragon Kingdom can understand the crazy things this white-faced scholar has done. Chen Bing didn't know the man at all, but Bai Mu knew it very well. When Bai Mu is so cruel, he even dares to touch himself. At this moment, the Viper's eyes were staring at Bai Mu, his tone was quite trembling, and his eyes were also a bit frightened. You, what do you want to do? I'm warning you, if you dare to mess around, then. At this time, Bai Mu was like this. He suddenly laughed, a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and his eyes were full of an indescribable taste. I don't want to talk so much nonsense to you today. If you are wise, get out of here. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. Bai Mu just gritted his teeth and spoke word by word. Although Viper and his group were unwilling to do so, they had no choice but to leave in despair. Bai Mu's eyes just stared at the venomous snakes retreating back, with a bit of coldness flashing in his eyes. Chen Bing turned his head and glanced at Bai Mu. Why? Why should you let them go? They deserve to die. At this time, Chen Bing came to the screen. After saying this, there was a wry smile on the corner of his mouth, and there was a bit of helplessness in his eyes. You have to understand that it's not just our teams that are here, there are many people here. If we are not careful, we will lose everything. At that time, we will only end up with someone else taking advantage of us. So this matter needs to be considered in the long run. At this time, Chen Bing only frowned slightly after hearing what Bai Mu said, but he didn't say much. In front of that door, King Guzhu looked at the stone door. After looking at it for a long time, he sighed so heavily. There was a kind of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Wry smile. What should I do now? This painting must be the answer, but I don't know what it means to play my brother and what I want to express in this painting, so I can only rely on you. Of course Lin Yu knew that since King Zhou could give him hints, he definitely knew something. The reason why King Zhou did this now was just to test himself. What Lin Yu was least afraid of was using his brain, so at this time, he came to this mural without even thinking about it. This mural seemed to be a scene of conferring kings. The lady was standing on a high platform, wearing a yellow robe, with a crown on her head. The man looked forward and stretched out a hand, pointing in the distance. So winding. Lin Yu looked in the direction of his finger and found that it was actually a 9-legged golden crow. The craftsmanship of this mural was really superb. The obedient and humble look of the ministers was vaguely visible. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu thought for a moment. After that, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I see. After the king of Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, his eyes were quite complicated. He turned his head and glanced in Lin Yu's direction. What do you understand? 9 is the ultimate number, yin and yang are the masters of the art, all things return to one place between heaven and earth, indifferent to one family, yin and yang are in harmony with all things, this is the way of yin and yang in heaven and earth, and the beginning of destiny returning to unity. Lin Yu just spoke unhurriedly. After Guzhu King heard what Lin Yu said, he nodded slightly, a special color flashed in his eyes, and then he raised his eyebrows slightly. Then what? 9 is the auspicious number of the dragon. Wine is the beginning of the union of yin and yang. The place where all things live together. The yin and yang of heaven and earth return to one place. All things are weighted in one place. The beginning of heaven and earth is not the same as one. The length of heaven and earth has no trace of all laws. The answer is hidden in it. I don't know if I am right or not. I Ching Tai Gong Pian, what you said is indeed true. I admire you very much. After Lin Yu heard what King Guzhu said, he just nodded slightly, smiled, and then made a fist-holding salute towards King Guzhu, with a flash in his eyes. Somewhat complex colors. Your Majesty is joking, cause and effect repeats itself in cycles, and the beginning is unpredictable. I just read a few more things, and other than that I don't have much ability. After King Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, a special color appeared in his eyes, and then a strange light flashed between his eyebrows. And just after this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something. He suddenly took a step forward, and then placed a Qianyuan symbol on top of the yin and yang hexagram. Gua. Finally, the surrounding land began to tremble violently. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a bit of complexity, and his eyes and eyebrows flashed with a bit of special brilliance, and then his brows were frowned together. It shouldn't be wrong, it shouldn't be wrong. After seeing Lin Yu like this, King Guzhu and several people around him stared at Lin Yu, especially King Guzhu at this time, with a faint smile on his lips, and he gently spread out his folding fan. My brother is not like what you know. He has been scheming since he was a child. The beacon fire incident was actually just because he loved that woman so much. And he knew one thing at the time. These princes were not obedient to orders, and they were in harmony but not in harmony. They had already had rebellious intentions. So the historical records were just left for future generations to hear. At this time, a special light flashed in the eyes of King Guzhu. At this moment, he clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. It seemed that he was about to spit fire. After hearing what King Guzhu said, Lin Yu also raised a bitter smile at the corner of his mouth, and a bit of helplessness flashed in his eyes. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 207. We don't have much time now, so please ask King Guzhu to open this door. After the King of Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, he took a sudden step forward. At this moment, he flew forward directly, and then he came to the stone door in one stride. Then he twisted slightly. The hexagram Jianyuan instantly became the hexagram Dikan. But at this moment, the violently trembling earth actually calmed down. After the King of Guzhu turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Meaning. Although I admire you very much, little guy, you must also understand one thing. There are no absolutes in everything. Nothing is absolutely right, and nothing is absolutely wrong. After hearing what King Guzhu said, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with something special. Just after this moment, he seemed to remember something, and then he did this. He nodded slightly. Yes, what you said is indeed true, but it is very interesting. After waiting for this moment, King Guzhu suddenly stepped forward, and then pushed gently towards the stone door. The stone door opened like this, but at this moment, a water dragon suddenly opened like this. Suddenly, he bit Lin Yu suddenly from behind the stone door. King Guzhu's expression condensed. At this time, his expression suddenly became ugly. Oh no, why is it like this? Lin Yu was also slightly stunned at that time. At this time, his face instantly became ugly, and his brows were knitted together. What should we do now? This water dragon already has dragon energy and is probably about to break through. It looks like an ownerless thing, but it is extremely difficult to conquer it. King Guzhu gritted his teeth, and then took a deep breath, calming down his mood slightly, and glanced forward. No, we absolutely can't go on like this. There is a problem, and it's a big problem. I have to think about it. When King Guzhu thought of this, just a moment later, he seemed to understand something. He came to the stone gate, and then smashed the dragon and phoenix pillar with one punch. After the punch was blasted out, the dragon and phoenix pillars shattered into pieces, but at this time the water dragon showed no intention of stopping and was still moving toward them. Lin Yu quickly summoned the dragon spirit. After the dragon spirit encountered the water dragon, it was impossible to restrain it from this bloodline. After all, it is also a strange beast from the ancient times, and the benefits and harms involved are beyond what ordinary people can imagine. So at this moment, the eyes of the dragon spirit were trembling slightly, and their eyes were quite complicated. Lin Yu's brows were knitted together, and a special color flashed in his eyes. In this case, what should we do? It looks quite bad. And just a moment later, the water dragon suddenly stopped, and he and the dragon spirit were in a stalemate. Naturally, the dragon spirit did not dare to take action first, but a look of pain appeared on the face of the water dragon. After seeing this scene, the dragon spirit's eyes flashed with confusion. His brows furrowed slightly, and then his eyes were full of curiosity. What's going on? At this time, a voice suddenly appeared in the mind of the dragon spirit. The voice seemed to come from the ancient wilderness, rolling in with endless majesty, which made people feel a little bit scared. Sigh. Why? Why do you want to become the lackey of the human race? Why do you want to succumb to the human race? Although the alien beasts and the human race coexist, and the taming of the orc race has never changed, you should also keep your heart, but now you are. Why is it like this? The sound of the water dragon made the dragon spirit's soul tremble slightly. At this time, the face of the dragon spirit was full of fear, and he subconsciously stepped back several feet in succession. I am also helpless. The current situation is like this, and this is also a helpless move. I don't want to be controlled by humans, but there is nothing I can do. After the water dragon heard what the divine dragon spirit said, it suddenly flicked its dragon tail, and actually blasted the divine dragon spirit away. After Lin Yu saw this scene, his pupils suddenly enlarged, and a bit of disbelief flashed in his eyes. Even he couldn't believe that this water dragon was so powerful, that it had reached such a powerful level. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the water dragon, and a special color flashed in his eyes. At this moment, his expression became condensed. The power of the dragon. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the dragon spirit suddenly swung its tail. This tail hit the water dragon, and the water dragon flew backwards. Then it hit the stone pillar heavily. Then, just a moment later, in just one breath, everything in the world seemed to belong to him. Immediately afterwards, a powerful force gathered directly on the dragon spirit. Just after this moment, the dragon spirit suddenly moved toward the water dragon, opening its bloody mouth toward him. The body was bitten so suddenly. This violent and surging power makes people look like they dare not look directly at it. After a moment, the world returned to silence again, and the water dragon seemed to disappear out of thin air in an instant. After the king of Guzhu saw this scene, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. At this moment, Lin Yu glanced at the king of Guzhu subconsciously, with a somewhat complicated look in his eyes. Of course he knew that this would definitely be the fault of King Guzhu. Your Majesty is very capable, but I don't know what is going on. Please clarify my doubts. After the king of Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, he just turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he spoke so lightly. He waved his hand. Just get out of trouble. As for what happens in this, it doesn't matter much. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 208. Of course Lin Yu understood that King Guzhu didn't want to tell him on purpose, but at this time he didn't say much, he just nodded slightly and smiled. What the prince said is indeed true. Just get out of trouble, and the rest is not important. The king of Guzhu smiled, and then he suddenly took a step forward, with Lin Yu following closely behind. The two men, the snake and the gravekeeper, also walked forward and walked out without saying a word. They didn't know what they were thinking at this time. After walking for a while, King Guzhu suddenly stood firm. Several contestants from Country H sat together like this. After such a long time, they still couldn't find the right path, so at this time they were in a bit of a commotion and began to blame each other. I just said that we should have studied this route carefully. If we had studied this route carefully, it would definitely not be what it is now. Yes, I said it before, but it's you, Li Junsheng, who insists on going your own way. Everyone thinks you are the captain and they didn't say anything more. But look at what's happening now. The consequences are all your fault. You should bear the main responsibility. Yes, I strongly recommend that Captain Li Junsheng be dismissed from his post. Me too, I strongly recommend that Captain Li Junsheng be dismissed from his post. Everyone was talking like this. The man's face was extremely gloomy, and his face was even more ugly. It was not until this moment that the man with the gloomy expression slowly stood up and looked around. All around, he just glanced coldly. If you dare to say more, believe it or not, I will tear your mouth apart now. I really don't understand. We all chose this path together at the beginning, but now it has to be pushed to me alone. You are worthy of it? Li Junsheng was like this, he said coldly. At this time, after everyone heard what Li Junsheng said, they hesitated for a moment, and then suddenly stood up, staring at him. Xiao Lu is dead. Now there are only 3 of us left. You saw what happened just now. Those strange fish almost killed all of us. Obviously the decision was made by the captain. You are not suitable to be this captain. Of course, Li Junsheng understood that it was pointless to argue with them now, so at this time, the corners of Li Junzhen's mouth only raised a bit of sneer, and a touch of contempt flashed in his eyes. Okay, whatever you want to do, just do it. I don't care. I just want to give up this captain's position. If any of you want to do it, just do it yourself. After Li Junsheng finished speaking, he stood up and walked out suddenly. After everyone heard what Li Junsheng said, their eyes and eyebrows were filled with joy. Li Junsheng looked at them like this, with a slight sneer on his lips. The people of Country H are like this. They are greedy for vanity and respect status. They are just a small place, but they always want to compete with the Dragon Country. They are simply blocking the car with their arms and overestimating their own capabilities. It is simply ridiculous to say that. Pole. But at this moment, Li Junsheng suddenly felt the smell of blood, and he half squinted his eyes. Stop arguing, do you smell blood? Li Junzhen's words immediately stopped everyone arguing. The smell of blood means that someone was injured. If someone is injured, it means that this place is dangerous. Although these people are vain, they are not fools. Of course they know that they cannot stay in this dangerous place for a long time, so at this moment they suddenly stood up and prepared to leave. But just when they were about to leave, a huge claw suddenly and wildly slapped at their bodies. The speed of the claw was extremely fast, just in the blink of an eye. It's already been filmed on them. Then, the guy went crazy towards the back and was shot flying out. After retreating for a long time, he barely stopped. There was a bit of helplessness in Li Junzhen's eyes. At this time, he slowly raised his head and glanced into the distance, with a trace of complexity flashing in his eyes. You bastard, you are seeking death, Li Junsheng was almost saying this through gritted teeth at this moment. The monster seemed to be able to understand what Li Junsheng said. He roared towards Li Junsheng, as if to warn Li Junsheng. After Li Junsheng heard the low roar, his face suddenly turned ugly. At this time, his legs couldn't help but tremble. The monster didn't seem to be very interested in him. He was just slowly approached Li Junsheng. Li Junzhong also subconsciously dodged behind him. But he just dodged the monster's claws, and then he was hit in the lower back by the monster's tail, and then the whole person flew out directly, which looked very miserable. Li Junzhong felt a sweetness in his throat, and then a mouthful of blood spurted out. The blood was scattered on the ground, looking a bit sad. There was a faint smile on the corner of Li Junzhen's mouth, a bit of amusement flashed in his eyes, and a sneer on the corner of his mouth. It's interesting. It's really interesting. I didn't expect that a mere first-order Lord-level beast could become so powerful in this tomb. It seems that this purpose is indeed something good. Li Junzhen's face began to turn gloomy, and at this time several other people turned their heads and stared directly at Li Junzhong, with a bit of panic in their eyes and a bit of fear on their faces. Fear. Captain, Captain, save us, this time it all depends on you, Captain. Li Junzhong slowly turned his head towards them, and just glanced coldly, with a slight sneer on the corner of his mouth, and the murderous intent on his body quietly emerged. At this time, Li Junzhong suddenly laughed, ha ha ha, interesting. You guys are really interesting. I just think of being afraid now. Don't you think it's too late to talk about being afraid now? Li Junzhen's voice suddenly became cold and stern. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 209. Li Junzhen's face was a bit gloomy, and the murderous intent in his eyes became more and more obvious, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. For some reason, they always felt that Li Junzhen's face was a bit scary at this moment, so at this time they subconsciously stepped back a few steps, their eyes were fixed on Li Junzhong, and then they shook their heads. Captain, 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 what do you want to do? You have to be calm, don't be impulsive. Li Junzhong licked his lips, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were fixed on the guys in front of him, and a bit of ferocity flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body was revealed. At this time, Li Junzhong suddenly stepped forward, his speed was extremely fast, and then he opened his mouth and bit one person directly. After seeing this scene, the other person felt his legs go weak, and he fell to the ground with fear in his eyes. At this time, the ice and fire beasts stared at the cold murderous intent on Li Junzhong, showing it without reservation, which made Li Junzhong feel terrified, so at this moment, he just took a few steps back subconsciously, and a bit of helplessness flashed in his eyes. At this moment, Li Junzhong took a deep breath and calmed down his mood. He half closed his eyes and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Interesting, it's really interesting. It's really interesting to watch you today. Li Junzhen's face seemed to be a little ferocious. His eyes were fixed on the guys in front of him. There was a bit of coldness in his eyes, and the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. Just between one breath and one breath, he bit a blood hole in his companion's body, and then, and finally, the breath on his body began to gradually weaken. Then everyone found that the breath on that person was rapidly dissipating, and desperately gathered towards Li Junzhen's body. Just in this moment, Li Junzhen's eyes actually showed a blood-red color, and he revealed a pungent smell of blood, which made everyone feel a sense of fear. At this time, Li Junzhong suddenly flew forward, and then he pounced on another companion. His speed was extremely fast. When he came to the companion, he opened his bloody mouth and bit him. Li Junzhen's mouth curled up a wicked smile, and the wicked smile began to become more and more obvious. Then he kicked madly at a place. Li Junzhen's speed was so strange that he was like a ghost, shuttling back and forth, and then a huge bat appeared behind him. The bat was full of dark patterns. The gray pattern was filled with a hazy feeling. This hazy feeling made everyone feel that something was wrong. All the eyes were fixed on Li Junzheng, and at this moment, a faint smile appeared on the corner of Li Junzheng's mouth, and there seemed to be a bit of coldness in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body also quietly emerged. Just in this breath, just in this virtual shell, Li Junzheng seemed to suddenly understand something, and the smile on his mouth was raised. At this time, Wang Yu and others saw this monster and Li Junzheng who were confronting each other in the distance. After Wang Yu saw this monster, some incredible light flashed in her pupils, and then she couldn't help swallowing her saliva, and her breathing was a bit heavy at this moment. How is it possible? How could this monster be so terrifying? What is going on? Alien Beast, Yin Yang Batlord Level 6, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Intermediate. Life, 999999999. Speed, 999999999. Defense, 999999999. Attack, 999999999. Skills, Blood Symbol Fury, Heaven and Earth Domain, Yin Yang Xian Tian. Blood Symbol Fury, it can make the host have the ability to devour the power of others, and can call the host to seize the power of others for its own use, but the conversion rate can only be between 30% and 50%, and as the level increases, the conversion rate will be lower. If the Lord Mirror is broken, the conversion rate will drop below 10%. Heaven and Earth Domain, use your own blood to summon a blood mist space. This blood mist space can be said to be a god-level existence, indestructible, and impure. The yin and yang of heaven and earth, the creation of creation, return to one place, and the beginning of yin and yang return to one. Yin Yang Xian Tian, yin and yang create, it is the wind that makes it, the energy of heaven and earth, all things are one, the void returns to one place, the way is impermanent. At this moment, a figure suddenly flashed out, and he came directly in front of this guy. His eyes were full of murderous intent on Yin Leng, and it surged out quietly. When he saw the monsters on both sides, he suddenly stopped. This figure did not seem to belong to any team. Everyone looked at him, with a bit of confusion in their eyes, and they could not figure out the true identity of this guy. And just in this breath, just in this moment, Wang Yu and the others noticed some rare abnormalities. The reason why it was rare was that they had never felt such a breath fluctuation. This breath fluctuation was very unique, and it seemed to be beating regularly and rhythmically in accordance with the will of heaven and earth. The rhythmic beating gave people a mysterious feeling. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 210. And at this moment, in the big screen, two people, a man and a woman, were staring at the screen, with a special light flashing in their eyes, a bit of excitement between their brows, and an anger that seemed to be quietly rising in their bodies. Emerged like this. Asshole, damn it. And at this moment, Sun Yuuru walked in. This week, Zhou Dongfei was the eldest son of the Zhou family of the Dragon Kingdom. He had always wanted to participate in this live broadcast, but for some reason, he was replaced by a mysterious quota. Before that, he had no idea who had replaced him. But when he saw Lin Yu on the screen, he understood all this instantly, so he was naturally furious at this time. Lin Meijiao is the daughter of the Lin family. This time she came to him and wanted to discuss some cooperation with him, which was generally about the world of strange beasts. After all, the world of alien beasts is very popular nowadays, and everyone wants to step in and get a piece of the pie. Of course, the eldest lady of the Lin family naturally wants the same. But this week Dongfei was very assertive and kept asking Lin Meijiao to wait for a long time before slowly walking out. Lin Meijiao turned around with a dark face, her eyes fixed on Zhou Dongfei's face. Mr. Zhou is such a big arrogant person. It's really not easy to meet you. Zhou Dongfei smiled, it's not too late to have a good meal. Why is Mr. Lin so anxious? Is it possible? There was a somewhat meaningful smile on Zhou Dongfei's lips. After Lin Meijiao heard what Zhou Dongfei said, her favorable impression of Zhou Dongfei dropped a few degrees. At this time, she stood up directly. In my opinion, there is no need for us to continue chatting. Lin Meijiao said and wanted to turn around and leave. Zhou Dongfei stood up. If you don't care about your status, you can leave now. After this cooperation is successful, I guarantee that you can gain a firm foothold in the upper-class Lin family of Dragon Kingdom. Zhou Dongfei spoke unhurriedly. After Lin Meijiao heard what he said, she suddenly stood still. How can you guarantee it? Because I have such strength. Zhou Dongfei picked up a bottle of wine as he spoke, and then slowly opened the seal. These guys are like wine. It is said that there is a kind of wine that is brewed from living animals. That kind of wine exudes a unique aroma. That unique aroma is entirely due to a kind of wine called shiju. Alien beasts have accumulated alcohol in their bodies during countless fights. So what we need to do is to cooperate to keep these little guys fighting. Lin Meijiao slowly turned around. Tell me, what can I get from working with you this time? Lin Meijiao's eyes were fixed on Zhou Dongfei. This cooperation is only superficial. Your foundation in the family is unstable now, and you are indifferent. Moreover, you still don't believe that you have placed an eye beside you. I believe you should be able to understand this. I will do this time. Yes, I will help you remove this eye. Lin Meijiao's eyes flashed with excitement. Can you really do it? Of course, no problem. But you still haven't told me what you plan to do. Zhou Dongfei slowly walked to Lin Meijiao, leaned down and whispered a few words in her ear. Lin Meijiao frowned. But after a moment, her brows straightened out, and her eyes were even more excited. Are you telling the truth? Zhou Dongfei nodded slightly. Yes, how about it? Think about it. Don't think about it, I believe you this time. Lin Meijiao gently hugged Zhou Dongfei's neck, which was somewhat unexpected by Zhou Dongfei. You. At this time, Lin Meijiao suddenly laughed. Her smile was quite charming, like a fairy. How about it? Is it interesting? As long as you can help me gain a foothold this time, I can promise you even more extreme things. Lin Meijiao's appearance at this moment was like a gorgeous fairy, which was breathtaking. Zhou Dongfei was so thick-skinned that he couldn't resist. Miss Lin, please respect yourself. Zhou Dongfei was about to push Lin Meijiao away, but at this moment, a figure barged in. Who else could come if not Sun Yuuru? Sun Yuuru was wearing a tight-fitting hip skirt and a white sweater on her upper body. She deliberately unbuttoned 2 buttons to give people a hazy feeling. She was holding a thick stack of documents, and although she didn't even knock on the door, she didn't show any signs of panic. Hello, Miss Lin. It is said that Miss Lin is an icy beauty who treats everyone with sincerity. Today I saw that the rumors from the outside world are completely false. I didn't expect Miss Lin to be so approachable. Sun Yuuru smelled like gunpowder as soon as she opened her mouth. At this time, Zhou Dongfei quickly pushed Lin Meijiao away, and the red wine accidentally spilled on Lin Meijiao's chest. Zhou Dongfei was quite confused because of Sun Yuuru's intrusion. Sorry. At this time, he quickly pulled out a few tissues from the table. Lin Meijiao didn't stop it at this time. The 2 women were tit for tat, as if they were competing with each other. Even she herself didn't know why she was so bold today. Sun Yuuru snorted coldly, and Zhou Dongfei reacted. Zhou Dongfei quickly stopped his hand and stood up. In just a moment, he returned to his previous calm state. Excuse me, Yuuru, I remember you seem to have a cloakroom. Hurry up and get some clothes from your cloakroom and put them on Miss Lin. Although Sun Yuuru was angry, she also knew the current situation. Overall, this woman was still sensible and considerate of the overall situation. This is why Zhou Dongfei likes this woman so much. Sun Yuuru just walked out. After Sun Yuuru left, Zhou Dongfei turned his head and looked at Lin Meijiao. The charm on this woman's face disappeared, replaced by a cold and stern look like winter. You did it on purpose just now. The atmosphere between the two people instantly became subtle. At this moment, Zhou Dongfei seemed to remember something. Lin Meijiao, Lin Yu, could it be that guy and the Lin family?